Hi, Ian. Thanks for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure, Lauren. It's always nice to meet another military spouse.
Yes, I know. And we both have the ESL component. So I know we were just chatting about that before this. I did a Fulbright actually in South Korea and got to teach over there for a year. So stayed a little bit longer than that. But remind me, where were you teaching English as a second language? Was it
So,
domestic or?
so it was all domestic. So it was for Catholic Charities in Newport News, Virginia. My wife was stationed out of Portsmouth,
Oh.
and again in Philadelphia while I was going to grad school there at Villanova.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, that is actually a perfect segue into a little bit about your background, and between the ESL component, the military component. So I'm just going to hand it over to you. Tell me a little bit more before we do a deep dive and chat more specifically. Gosh, we've got a lot to cover today, but we're going to get into some book reviews and a little bit more on the financial side for military folks. But share a little bit about your background if you don't mind.
So when people ask where I'm from, I have to say the Mid-Atlantic because until moving to Texas and with a few sojourns,
Yeah.
thanks to my own Army service and my studies abroad, I've lived in Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, New York, and I was born in Jersey.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was at Fort Huachuca for my basic officer leadership course when I was a second lieutenant in the Army. So I had a friend approach me and said, let me get this straight. You live in Philadelphia? Yes.
Yeah.
You're from New York? Yes. Your
Okay.
car is registered in Virginia? Yes. And you're
Uh-huh.
part of the Maryland National Guard? Yes. So yeah, that was a snapshot of my life at that time. And now that I'm living in Texas, having moved here 10 months ago, I'm very much realizing that I am a mid Atlantic creature, but I'm having a lot of fun here nonetheless.
Yeah, there's something really beautiful and kind of crazy about living in a lot of different places. You've got friends and what have you that end up kind of everywhere, right? But you see so many different cultures, ways of life. It definitely puts you outside of your comfort zone. So, tell us a little bit more about that. So, taught English, you're in the National Guard. What brought you to Texas?
So, my wife is a Coast Guard officer, and
Mhm.
that was her dream ever since she was 8. And I know that in part because I met her at that age.
Okay.
Yeah. So we grew up together. She
Yeah.
was always excited about the military thanks to two of her uncles, one in the Coast Guard, one in the Navy.
Yes.
And for me, I come from a family of civilian academics on one side and
Mhm.
engineers on the other. And one grandfather who spent a couple of years in the Air Force Reserve when everybody and their brother was in the reserves at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
He actually has funny stories about the Cuban Missile Crisis and working the swing shift at that time in the motor pool.
Hmm.
So, yes, we grew up in New York, stone's throw from West Point. Not that either of us had anything to do
Yeah.
uh, with West Point and the U.S. Military Academy, but we grew up in that area. We were friends at church, friends through homeschooling, and eventually I got up the nerve to ask her out when I was 17 and she was
Yeah.
18. And despite the skepticism, we kept a long distance relationship going through college. And
Mhm.
she inspired me to join the National Guard during that time.
Mm.
And I did that for a little over 10 years. And about 18 months ago, I decided to separate at the 10-year mark as a captain because having two deployable parents really wasn't what we wanted for our
Fair.
two young kids.
Yeah, I get that. Can you share a little bit more about your time in the service and how that's connected you to what you're gearing up to do today and in the financial advisory space? I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of what's inspired you to go that direction, kind of the why, what you saw is, literally like boots on ground, talking with others that kind of directed you along this path today.
Yes. So, as an ESL teacher, even as an intern in
Mhm.
Virginia, while I was attending Old Dominion, they had me doing ESL classes for very recent refugees. And
Yeah.
these refugees get a couple $100. They get plugged into some resources. They have a rather short runway before they're expected to be at least semi independent.
Hmm.
And so this was crash course ESL.
Yes.
And simultaneously, I was also in ROTC
Hmm.
at Old Dominion. And about a year later, my wife, who's a prevention officer in the Coast Guard,
Hmm.
she transferred from her little 270 cutter
Hmm.
out of Portsmouth to working at Sector Delaware Bay
Uh-huh.
in Philadelphia. And so I was teaching ESL at a handful of schools around town as an adjunct,
Uh-huh.
which is kind of the Uber driver of college professors.
Mm.
You pick up whatever courses are left over by the tenured people.
Yeah, yeah.
And if that means you drive from one end of town to the other to teach your 2, 3 classes in a day to make it work, you do it.
Right, right, right.
But my ESL students, I would see again, some of them were refugees, but most of them just wanted to get an American college education. And
Hmm.
so their families were rather well off. So
Hmm.
you would see young Saudi guys with more money than they knew what to do with and more freedom. And now they're all 19.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so just talking to them, it's like, just because you have money doesn't mean you should use it this way. And the casinos are not your friend.
Hmm. So do you mind sharing a little bit more about, you talked a little bit earlier about, I think, some of these challenges of being able to explain language barriers, right? As it relates to finances. I know you've seen it on the ground just working in the military, right? Having to help people. I mean, you think about as someone who's in the military, right? You are being deployed, usually in a pretty frequent cadence. And there's a lot of things to be able to get your house in order. So from a very young age, you're literally thinking about these sorts of things. What kind of things did you hear about? I mean, I'm sure there's people that are listening that have family that are military, loved ones that are in the military, and from a financial perspective, are even advisors, right? That maybe have clients that have military connections. What things should they be thinking about, or even resources that would be helpful for them if they are talking with clients, for them to learn a little bit more about maybe tools to be able to share with their clients, or even uh, for their loved ones as well.
Yes. So the first thing is, I wanted to give a shout out to the Military Financial Advisors Association, which
Hmm.
is a coalition of fiduciary fee only financial advisors, many of whom are also part of XYPN.
Yeah.
And there's also the Mill Money Con, and I had a
Oh
great
yeah,
time
absolutely.
attending the event this past April in
Hmm.
Denver. And yeah, the association and the convention are great resourcing because for military members, the lifestyle is different enough that it really helps to have people who target your niche and speak your language,
Right.
as it were. And there are a lot of benefits to being in the military,
Hmm.
but that also can throw a wrench in the planning by somebody who hasn't been accustomed to that environment. For
Right.
example, the Secure Act 2.0
Uh-huh.
took away the ability to write off on your taxes
Hmm.
a required move. So if you work for Microsoft and they tell you to move to Texas, sorry, we can't do that anymore.
Right.
But if Uncle Sam tells you to move to Texas, well, you can still write that off. But you
Right.
could wind up not enjoying that advantage because your advisor just doesn't know it's that niche. And there's also things as well, like having an advisor who can remind you to apply for your veterans benefits
Mm-hmm.
on time while you're out processing from the military, or you may have an advisor who thinks their investment products are the
Right.
bee's knees, and they may be,
Right.
but they don't know about TSP, which
Mm-hmm.
is a great benefit that federal employees have in terms of being able to invest and have that come straight out of their paychecks.
Yep. I feel like, in the advisory space, right, there's just so much jargon that can come along with it. And it's the same thing in the military. There's so much jargon. So if you can meet both those worlds and know, as often as they say in the advisory space, there's these triggers, right? There's these life triggers, but a lot of those life triggers are unique for military, in particular. I mean, even think about like retiring, right? Like or transitioning from active duty to the reserve, or these sorts of things really can impact your portfolio and long-term projections and even things like your health insurance, right? Um, I'm sure these are conversations that you were having, or at least to a certain degree, or they would come up with others that you'd be working with in the National Guard. Is that fair?
Yes. So while I was teaching ESL in Philadelphia,
Hmm.
I would get off of work on Friday, and
Uh-huh.
then I would put on my uniform and shave.
Yeah, yeah.
And then on Saturday, I was a part of a cavalry squadron in the Maryland National Guard that was being turned into a military intelligence battalion.
Hmm.
And that, of course, meant that the security clearance requirements for the positions in that new organization were higher than the ones in the old organization. Plus, there were a few disgruntled souls who weren't exactly happy about it. I
Hmm.
would compare it to a football team being told you're going to be a chess club.
Oh, little it's shaken up. So
Yes.
yeah.
So as a assistant S2 in the battalion staff, I was given the responsibility, or the short end of the stick, as they saw it, to help lots of soldiers apply for security clearances.
Hmm.
And that includes financial background checks
Hmm.
and educating people on how your financial background will impact your clearance.
Right, right.
And then, as the security clearance guy, that followed me for the rest of my time in the National Guard.
Hmm.
And so, helping people with those things was always very rewarding when they wanted to be helped. I learned from that I very much enjoy helping people. And in 2017, 2018,
Yeah.
something came out called continuous evaluation, and it was a
Mhm.
big game changer for security clearances throughout the government. So, continuous evaluation, which was kind of rolled out between 2018 and 2021,
Mhm.
was all about, we're not going to just do a top to bottom reevaluation of your
Yeah.
fitness to safeguard secrets every, say, 6 years for top secret clearance or 10 years for a regular secret clearance.
Right.
We are going to be scraping the internet
Hmm.
and databases for potentially derogatory information 24/7. And if you pop hot, a
Hmm.
human at the Consolidated Adjudication Service at Fort Meade in Maryland will
Uh-huh.
review it, and you may get a letter handed to you by your friendly neighborhood S2, me,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
saying, "What's up?
Hmm.
We're going to pull, like,
Right.
we either have or we will pull your clearance if we don't get an answer to this concerning information."
Uh-huh.
And once upon a time, it was that your commander, somebody you actually make eye contact with, would have to put in for your clearance to be revoked,
Right.
or could say, he's okay, we dealt with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, the onus is on the commander to say, please don't take my guy's clearance. Here's what we're doing. to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
So a steady drumbeat of people who needed help turned into a river, and I was the SSO of an infantry division at the time, special
Yes.
security officer. So midst of COVID, wall to wall people who are needed to deploy, and they have to get reinvestigations or they've got issues, and that was stressful, but I learned a lot through it. And in another part of my work experience, I served a couple of years at US Africa Command, and there was a Navy Reserve intelligence officer, and he told me about this thing called CFP.
Mm-hmm.
And so after coronavirus died down, I was sitting down with my wife, like, we can't keep doing this. I
Right,
want to do
right.
something new, and I need a job that will travel well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And CFP made sense.
So that's the route. As you get involved with it, right? There's so many resources. Just asking if there's resources like you mentioned, XYPN. What kind of things have you gotten involved with to date just to learn more, or even prior to kind of going this route to learn more that this was the right path for you? I know you've, I think in some notes prior, you mentioned Dave Ramsey, kind of been following some of the other conversations that are related to that. Where did you go to start to go like, hey, is this the right career for me? What does this mean? Like, what's the time investment? What's this community like? What has that process been like for you? And what have been the valuable resources that have come out of it?
So my dad has been an English professor at small Christian colleges
Yeah,
since the 1980s, and my mom has worked administration. I'm the eldest of six kids.
goodness. You've got a big
Yes.
family.
Yeah, whether she was an administrator for the college or she was just administering, we six kids, five boys and a girl at the end,
Yeah,
there was always the effort to make ends meet because small Christian college in a very expensive part of the country just outside of New York City, and for a large part of my childhood, a single income household, we were really good at stretching a dollar. And not a day would go by when, well, we're thrifty Scotsmen wasn't thrown around.
right,
Yeah, we make do, we don't waste. And even as, my dad got a few pay raises, my mom started working part time, and some of those things changed.
right, right,
It was deeply ingrained from the get go in our family life. And when I got married to my wife,
right.
one of our friends gave us the Financial Peace University gift box set. And
Oh,
so,
I'm not familiar with this. Tell me more.
so Dave Ramsey has his Financial Peace University, which is
Oh,
more of just, it's a series of DVDs, it's some books, and it's study guides, and you can do it like a Bible study group.
got it.
And it is a very good resource
Hmm.
as a starting point.
Hmm.
But as I've said in one of my podcast episodes, Dave Ramsey is good for people who are bad with money and
Hmm.
bad for people who are good with money.
Hmm.
So, and Dave Ramsey is extremely anti debt, and kind of like you will have people, if you go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, everyone's going to be extremely against alcohol,
Hmm.
probably because they've all been burned
Hmm.
by misuse of the substance. But I have to push back on Dave and say, no, debt has a useful purpose. Debt is not the devil, it's just a tool, or a chainsaw, you might say. You cannot play fast and loose with the chainsaw or you will get hurt. But
Hmm.
please don't try to chop down a redwood with a little hatchet.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Um, So it sounds like, Dave Ramsey was an initial starting point. Hear a little bit more about that. Your upbringing was a starting point. XYPN mentioned earlier. Are there any other resources that you've leaned into as you've been kind of exploring this profession?
Yes. So I started the Bluff Books podcast
Hmm.
as a series of posts on LinkedIn to keep myself accountable for really reading books.
Yeah.
And through those posts, I've exposed myself to as broad a variety of personal finance literature as I can. And I'm on my 47th book for doing posts. My 19th episode dropped
Ah,
last week. And I figure if I can talk intelligently with somebody for 30 minutes about a book, I've probably read it.
yeah, absolutely. So, okay, 47 books in what time period?
So about 2.5 years.
Okay, that's pretty decent. So then, okay, of those books, are there any standout ones that you would recommend as that just really stood out to you? You go, I want to
So,
read this book again, or maybe two or three times again.
so I have an article coming out this month on the GoVA website called Operation Contentment:
Hmm.
Military Families versus Overwork and Overspending. And it's an essay that applies ideas from my favorite financial literacy book to the unique military family situation.
Oh, interesting.
So the book is Your Money or Your Life by Joe Dominguez and Vicky Robin, and is on its fourth edition as of 2018.
Oh, yeah.
And Your Money or Your Life is all about getting the maximum value for your life energy, not
Hmm.
just your money, but your time, your health, your sanity, all of those resources that you have, and investing it in such a way that you will actually have a life,
Hmm.
not getting caught up in consumer spending, not
Yes.
getting caught up in personal ambition. Not to say that spending or ambition are inherently bad, but when they're not thought through, you will find yourself with a an atrocious commute for a job you don't really like to keep up with the payments on a house that's way too big for your family's needs.
Yeah, that balance. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that too. And it's also good to hear. I mean, it's quite a few books, and then also being able to take the time to be able to review them takes time as well. So appreciate you sharing that. I also just to kind of close up things here, really appreciate you sharing more about your personal background, your journey to the financial services world, even though it sounds like it's been kind of baked in you from day one, to some degree or another. And then also, I want to make sure that we do a link to, I think you said it's a LinkedIn page for Bluff Books as well as a podcast on Spotify and Apple. Is that right?
Yes, so it's the Bluff Books brand. So
Hmm.
building, leading, understanding financial freedom.
Okay.
And when you are in the military, there's something called the bluff, the bottom line up front. So
Hmm.
I am the self appointed reading rainbow of financial literacy books,
Love it. That's so great.
but you don't have to take my word for it.
Yeah. Love it. Awesome. We'll include that link below. I'm sure it's full with resources and then continuously being added to. So thanks for giving that shout out. And then if that article comes out, we'll also make sure to link to it as well. But Ian, thank you. This is fun to just hear a little bit of the spread of background, and specifically, money management and a little bit about your background for military folks and for those that work closely with the military. So thank you again for your time.
It was my pleasure.